I would go to youth group as a teenager in short shorts and tank tops with like the really skinny little straps, and nobody really cared because, it could be like 40 degrees at 8 o'clock at night, and the church did not have very good air conditioning. So everyone would just be sweating bullets the whole time, and nobody really batted an eyelash if the girls wanted to wear something that wasn't going to give them heat stroke. And I'm not saying that like the Australian church is better or that we get it right all the time. Like, I don't know if my experience was universal or if I just got lucky at the particular youth groups that I went to, but the purity culture was just never something that I experienced, not in the way that it's described to me by Americans who grew up in the church. And are you guys okay over there? Are you okay?
Damn, I'm glad I didn't peak in high school. It's my best days will be in the past. I know, looking back, it ain't all bad, but damn, I'm glad I didn't peak in high school.
Hey everyone, welcome to Unlearning Youth Group. We're the podcast where we take a look at all the things we learned back in youth group, find the good, unlearn the bad, and figure out where the heck we go from here. We haven't met. My name is Jonathan Carone, and we're joined, as always, by our co-host, Mr. Eric Williams. Eric, go ahead and say hey to the people.
What's up, people? Depending on when you're listening to this is either beach body season or it's about to be beach body season. So we've got an important topic to talk about that I love talking about each and every season we do the podcast.
We try to hit purity culture at least one time every season because it was such an integral part of youth group, of church, of being a teenager in the church. And it's one of the things that I think has caused the most shame and pain and bad ideas moving forward. It's one of the biggest things we have to unlearn. So today we are hitting something that is very summer specific. It's the idea that girls had to wear one pieces, tankinis, or t-shirts to any water related event that we did back in youth group. If it was church related, no two pieces were allowed because somehow in church, a girl's stinky belly button is sexually attractive.
I think we've talked about this in other episodes, but in a youth group that we led, we would talk about, I guess we would, but mostly the girls would talk about to other girls covering up your B's, your boobs, your belly, and your butt. You had to cover up your 3 B's, your boobs, belly, and butt. So those were the three things that you just had to somehow, they were sinful to leave exposed or even hinted to.
If you are a woman and you are listening to this episode, at some point you had to either buy an awkward one piece or throw a t-shirt on whatever you were wearing, more than likely in youth group growing up. And here's the thing. There wasn't a universal rule for guys either.
No, not at all.
Guys could roll up wearing whatever they wanted to, and that was okay. But girls, nope.
And in some cases for the guys, it was like funny. You know what I mean? Like if in some cases guys wore the shortest chubbies, or if they would like roll up their bathing suit, stuff like that. So that was basically, a grape smuggling banana hammock. Like that was like that was used for humor, whereas we didn't apply that same rule or that same, there was a more restrictive rule for girls than there was for guys for sure.
Or if the guy was the musclehead, meathead high school kid with the V and everything, like he'd wear super low cut shorts to show off that V. And the idea, and we'll get into this sentence a little bit more later, but boys are more visually stimulated than girls are. That was one of the things that was said for the reason for this. And we'll talk about this when we get to the part about like, what do we do wrong and where do we go from here? But that idea is just looking back, not knowing what I know now, is totally untrue. But here's the other funny part. Eric, I don't know, you didn't grow up in church as much as I did, so you may not have been a part of this. Were you ever around a youth group or a church setting to where guys and girls couldn't swim together?
I mean, I've heard of them, there was definitely that because there were, I worked for the YMCA when I was in high school. And so we had a lot of homeschool situations where we had a lot of religious groups that would come to use our pools. And there was definitely a lot of that where we, depending on their background, you couldn't have, guys, like we would have lock-ins, right, for some of these different churches, and the guys would have pool time and then the girls would have pool time. So yes, I'm familiar with it.
So that was definitely what I grew up in. The lock-in thing I totally forgot about, but that's exactly, the guys would swim from 1 to 2 in the morning and the girls would swim from 2 to 3 in the morning.
and I was the 14-year-old lifeguard sitting there just trying to stay awake.
But I remember specifically youth camp, church camp. I was probably 5th or 6th grade, and the guys and the girls had to swim separately. We would only interact because the girls would go swimming first, and then the guys would come in, and we'd have a baptism service in between, while both sexes were there. But the girls were wearing t-shirts, and I never understood, looking back, why were the girls wearing t-shirts and having to cover up in 5th grade with no guys around?
Right, in front of other girls. Yeah, it just, so if the argument is, you want to make sure, like the whole reason why the purity culture piece existed, which we'll get to the good behind it, but it's like, if your justification was to prevent your brothers in Christ from stumbling, but you're not around the brothers in Christ, like, are you saying you're trying to prevent your sisters in Christ from stumbling, or are we trying to just control things? Because I mean,
and in 5th grade.
In 5th grade, yeah, especially. And I think that, you brought it up before, but it was like trying to say that, girls aren't as visually stimulated as guys. I mean, we've seen in the past here, like Turning Red just came out. And so to kind of get that little bit of a Disney Pixar view of a 13-year-old girl's perspective, and they're obviously doing their drawings of the boys they liked. And then on TikTok, you're seeing creators, like I want to mention Confused Christians. If you're on TikTok, you should follow her. But she mentioned too, like, are we not looking at the same boys? Because girls, now that they are able to have these kind of democratized platforms like TikTok and podcasts and other things like that, are like, no, this is not true. And so I think looking back, you're like, man, what lie were we fed, or were we feeding others?
That Confused Christians TikTok was one of the funniest things I have seen recently. So, I mean, we've kind of talked about what this idea was. You get the idea at this point. One of the things that I did was I put it out on TikTok and asked women how this idea made them feel. What did having to wear a two-piece, having to wear a one-piece, or having to wear a t-shirt over a two-piece, how did that make them feel growing up? And I just want to read you some of the answers that I got, because I think they're important to hear. If you are a parent, if you are a current youth leader, this is the way that people are feeling when we do that to them. Monica said, it made me feel inferior for not wearing a t-shirt over swimwear. And so I thought that was interesting. Chloe said, it made me feel excluded, unhappy with my body, and judged on my physical appearance from age 6. Age 6.
Yep.
Jamie said, I ended up being super uncomfortable with my body and also with anything that actually fit me.
Yeah. Callie
Ann said, it translated into feelings of shame as an adult. You don't just flip a switch at 18 or on the wedding day. You relive those rules as always. As an adult, I struggle with body and sexuality as big shame moments. It sucks because I want to be my authentic self, but my authentic self is shameful based on the rules that were set.
That's amazing.
I mean, these are grown adults who are now saying this as collateral damage from youth group. Nikki said, as a teen, it sent the message that my body was a cause for other sexual sin. Still unlearning that one.
That's crazy.
So that's one of the ones I want to I want to jump off that idea, because I've mentioned this in another episode. So if you're a longtime listener, you've heard me talk about this, but the idea that it was the girl's responsibility solely for the purity and the thoughts of the guys.
Mm-hmm.
The shame that came with that, I just can't imagine being put in that spot.
Right. Yeah. And I think what that does, and every time we talk about this is kind of what it comes back down to me, but it's like whether us as leaders, whether the male aspect of this was thinking about this intentionally or not, it comes down to control. So, whether it was consciously or subconsciously, because the message that's sent is there's something wrong with the female body if it's not controlled. Now that causes an issue. There's something wrong. Females are or women are the source of sin for men is now a control thing, because that still puts the men in a hierarchy above women control wise. And it's like, man, now you've not only gone from being, physically, we talk about physical differences, but also now emotionally, mentally, and spiritually setting women as inferior or as being in a spot where they need to be controlled. Not only do they need to be controlled by men, they need to control themselves, and women need to police other women, because we can't let this thing out,
And one of the things that I found interesting in the responses from the TikTok question, and one of the story at the beginning was used from one of those responses where someone duetted or stitched the video. This is a highly American thing.
Yeah.
You heard the accent in the intro, that it was an Australian accent, and her entire video talked about the idea that in Australia, like, it wasn't sexual like that.
Right.
If they covered up in Australia, it was because the sun was so dang hot, and it was a preventative measure so that people didn't get sunburn or sun poisoning.
Mm-hmm.
But they live outside so much. She went on in the story. It was nothing for girls to show up to youth group events in short shorts and tank tops because it was so dang hot.
Right.
And they didn't sexualize things in the same way that we do in America. And that was eye-opening to me. I know that we have our own issues in the American church and that we approach things wrong, but I don't think I realized how pervasive that idea of the over-sexualization of young girls is, both in the secular culture in America, because I don't want people to think this is just a church thing,
Mm-hmm.
but also in the church, how we just overly sexualize everything when it comes to teenage girls.
Yeah. And I think it's even, I'm glad you brought that up, because it's not only American, but I think a little bit more a modern approach as well. Because like I said, I worked throughout high school and college in YMCAs across Ohio. And one of the YMCAs, they were like one of the last ones to stop doing nude bathing times. So literally, into the 80s and 90s, they had swim times where, it was gender separate, but like there was no bathing suits. And like they, if you look in the history of that, it's because even indoor, outdoor bathing, if you would wear clothes to go swimming, it would actually be toxic for the water, because you're bringing in all that stuff from the fibers in your clothes and everything else like that. So like, even just thinking back, how did we get to a point where in the 20s, 30s, 40s, we had women swimming naked with other women, and now at youth group we have fifth grade girls wearing a t-shirt with other fifth grade girls. Like, that's super weird. And okay, so not like I want to go back to it, because trust me, I've been in quite a few locker rooms where I wish people would put
the old
towels
dude in
on.
the locker room,
right? Exactly.
With the leg up on the bench,
and
just having a conversation.
It's like the steam room, and the it's just let it all hang out. And it's like, okay, I don't want to go back to that necessarily, but I think that just illustrates the point that we as Christians tend to go like, well, this is how it's always been, or this is what God ordained from the Garden of Eden and from all this, when it's like, no, really, this and a lot of other subjects have evolved with us culturally and have evolved with us over the last generation or two. That is one of those pieces why we need to unlearn some of those things, so that we don't continue to cause future trauma and future pain for the next generation.
And we could spend this entire episode talking about the purity side of it and purity culture,
Mm-hmm.
but there were other implications and other bad results from these policies that I don't think we necessarily think about. One of them, I couldn't get the username for the person who said this, but she said, it's worse when you're poor and your options are Walmart and the local thrift store. That sucks.
Yep.
I mean, when we do this in youth group or in church settings, what if that person only has one bathing suit?
Mm-hmm.
So not only are you shaming them from a physical sexuality side of things, you're also adding in the economic shame as well, that they
Right.
couldn't go out and afford a one-piece bathing suit. That's something that I don't think I realized until the last couple of years. It's something that wouldn't have even crossed my mind. And that's my privilege speaking there.
Yeah.
But I never would have thought about that.
Well, and leading these youth groups and camps and things like that, my wife was always, as it is, ministry couple, whatever. She was always one of the leaders as well. And she taught in, poorer school districts. And she would always talk about that because she was a middle school teacher. And she would talk about, one, for her, trying to find a bathing suit that fit, that was a one piece that was, quote unquote, appropriate, was difficult as an adult, let alone now she's got her own students and the girls that are in her group that she's trying to help them find something appropriate as well. And then, hearing her talk about the stories of just how that happens girl to girl, to even bring that up, like, wait, why do we have to do this? Well, because of this, because of that, and now the conversation gets awkward where you're just like, I don't even feel right justifying it. And in some cases, it was just easier for some of her girls to avoid being a part of the gathering or whatever else because, they couldn't afford it, or it was just impractical, or some of the other, things that some of the other women who are commenting that, just a body image issue, and they didn't even want to put themselves in that position. And so they avoided an opportunity to be in fellowship with the youth group or an opportunity to even be a part of the community because of this barrier that we were creating as leaders.
Well, that was my next point. Not only did it ostracize people who didn't have the money for a second bathing suit, but it also created this giant barrier to entry. So not only do they now have to get over the shame of not having the money, but if you invited a friend to your event, you had to make sure they knew to wear a one piece or that they were comfortable with a girl with a t-shirt on. And so it wasn't just hey, my church is doing this thing, like we're hanging out at a pool party, I'd love for you to come. It's, hey, I'd love for you to come, but you also have to make sure you wear a one piece, or if you wear a two piece, they're going to make you wear a t-shirt over top of it. And then you're having to explain that to people.
Yeah, you have that awkward moment where your friend shows up and now she's in a normal two-piece bathing suit. And then there is the public leader has to come and say, hey, come over here. Let's talk about it. And next thing you know, she's walking back out in a t-shirt. And how embarrassing is all of that situation. And so maybe that's your first experience in church, are these outreach events that we do in youth group, which is a pool party, which is something like that. And now your friend shows up, but then their first experience is a source of shame caused by a church situation.
And when they're not in youth group events and they're doing water-based events with their friends, when they're going to the pool together, they're not doing this. And so it's not like we're
right.
The good behind this approach is that we're trying to protect kids. With anything purity culture, that was the good that underlied that approach.
Intention, right.
But yeah, that one time a summer, you're going to protect them, but the entire rest of the summer, it's not going to be. What are we really doing there?
Yeah, if most of your kids have most of your girls have two different bathing suits anyway, what's the other bathing suit for? Every other time when they're not at youth group, So it's pretty ridiculous to think about it that way. And I'll say this too. Here's the other bad part that it leads to. So my wife teaches, like I said, middle school. And right now we live in an area with a lot of, let's say, a particular denomination that is known for being generally conservative in the Southwest mountain area that may or may not be considered heretical by other mainline denominations. Anyway, so what my wife says is, because of this extended purity culture, what happens is the boys in her class, 7th grade boys, come in and they seem to have a very flippant attitude, very low respect, especially for the girls in their class or their female teachers. But the girls who are a part of this particular separatist denomination of, let's say, after day type of people, latter day, let's say, they come in and they are very proper. They are very reserved. They will not share. They do not talk about emotion. They do not talk about feelings. And it's like she can tell that these girls do not want to mess up. They do not want to screw up. They do not want to be seen. They do not want to cause problems. And so, whereas we're trying to protect young girls, that first, we've talked about it. The lack of consistency between girls and boys causes problems for the boys, and then it's maybe an overcorrection for a lot of the girls.
Mm-hmm. We've talked on many episodes, like half of season 3 was purity culture issues. We've done an episode on season 1 and season 2. So if you want to hear us talk more about choosing not to sexualize the opposite sex or sexualizing kids in general, or how we have to teach kids, especially boys, to retrain their minds instead of bounce their eyes, you can go listen to those ideas in those other episodes. For this one, I think Eric put this in our notes. I think I want to land here because we do want to respect your time with what you have. Eric, in our notes, can you talk about what you wrote down about where do we go from here when it comes to approaching most of these purity culture issues? What's the grid or the filter we need to send it all through?
Yeah, I think, I will bring that up. Here's what I want to say. If you're listening to us this far, this is what I think needs to be said as well. Most women, you already know this. And so maybe hearing us talk about these things is validating to you. And I want you to hear that, your experience is valid, right? But I think a lot of the things that we talk about here, especially when it comes to purity culture, how come two, middle-aged white dudes are talking about purity culture as it relates to women? It's mostly because I want the men listening to understand that this is going on. If you haven't heard this, if you don't understand this, if you don't know this, you need to know that this is happening. It has happened. Your wife.
Because on almost all of my TikToks that talk about purity culture, the comments are women agreeing with me, thanking me for the validation, and men saying, well, aren't we going to teach purity anymore? We just tell people to go out and sleep with whoever they want to. And it's men fighting back about this issue instead of actually owning up the idea that maybe we did things wrong.
Yes. So hear us, women who are listening. This is not trying to mansplain your situations, your experiences. This is us trying to use our male voices to talk to other men, because unfortunately, they're not listening to the women in their lives, or the women in their lives are too afraid to tell them about this. So anyway, here is the framework that I would look at. Is I always talk about the ask why 5 times when it comes to this. So Jonathan, let's role play here. You tell me what the topic is here.
Ladies, if you're going to come to our beach pool party, you got to be wearing a one-piece bathing suit.
Okay, I hear that. Why?
Because we don't want boys looking at your boobies.
Why is that?
Because they can't take control of their mind and they're visually stimulated.
Oh, see, within already 3 whys, we're getting down to a different issue. Why?
Because we taught them to bounce their eyes instead of not to look at their sisters in Christ as sexual beings.
Why?
I don't know.
See, going from there, if you start to get digging down, we start to take these, dogmatic rules. Girls need to wear a one piece. And then when you just say, well, why is that? And you start to dig down to the root of why it is, it has nothing to do with the girls, right? We've gone through and this was just a role play, right? But like we get down to, it has everything to do in this particular situation with the boys. Oh, and so if we are honest by that 5th why, the answer is we don't want to have the hard conversations with boys to help them understand the responsibility they need to take in their own lives. What we want to do is control the source of the thing that's making it difficult for boys to take responsibility in their own lives, and that's a girl's body. And so to continue to go down that path becomes a way to unlearn and a way to positively move forward with some of these dogmatic type of rules that we've set.
It's been a while since we mentioned that Eric and I are both in marketing, but one of the things that plays out in marketing that I think has transformed my thinking on a lot of this stuff is the idea that there are 3 types of problems. There are external problems, internal problems, and philosophical problems. The external problem is we don't want boys to be thinking the things they shouldn't. It's the external, the physical thing. The internal problem is how that external problem makes them feel.
Yeah.
Boys shouldn't be looking at girls like that. Why? Internally. Well, they're going to think this. They're going to not be able to control their thoughts or whatever. if we take it to the philosophical problem, why is it just plain wrong for boys to be having those thoughts and to thinking those things? Because it's sin to be lusting after another person. Okay, so we now have our external, our internal, and our philosophical problem. Most people, this is politicians, this is marketers, this is business owners, this is product designers. They build and develop things for the external problem. And so we don't want these other things to happen. So we're just going to go ahead and tell girls cover up. And that's going to solve all three layers of the problem. The thing is, people make decisions based off their internal problems, not the external problem.
Yes.
So if we really want to have change, if we really want to have influence, we have to start speaking to the internal problems that people are facing. Boys are going to think that about girls. Okay, that's a legitimate problem. That is a legitimate issue. Lust is a sin.
Whose issue
how
is it?
can we start combating that issue without putting the blame on the external problem? How can we actually start going after the internal problem and working towards that? That's where this why series of questions gets, because you get from the external to the internal and philosophical. And if we can start combating the internal and the philosophical, then we're able to make generational change and actually help kids and teenagers moving forward so that they can have proper ways to think and do as they become adults, instead of having to get to where they're 35 and they're having to unlearn all this stuff.
Exactly. And then be careful, everybody who's listening to this, whether it's you thinking this or you that is agreeing and now is going to say these things, and this is going to be the response. Someone will inevitably use a straw man argument to say something else, just like what Jonathan said earlier. The response will be, well, then what do you want? You think that women should be able to run around all naked and showing everything all over the place? Is that what you want in front of my 2-year-old? You know, they come up with this extremely weird and specific.
P.S. That was God's original design for people before sin entered the world and the fall of man.
Right. So they come up with this weird and specific thing that's surface level again. And, first of all, we got to avoid getting in conversations like that, but play it out and say, well, no, I mean, that's not what we're talking about. And continue to ask those whys. Why would somebody do that? And also, why does that change the problem? If there is someone right now that's running around naked outside, in front of any man, let's say it's a woman running around naked in front of any man, that is still not the woman's problem for the man's lust and thoughts.
Likewise, if a dude's running around naked, it's not his fault or not his responsibility to control the woman's thoughts as well.
Correct.
We are responsible for our own thoughts and desires and temptations.
Yeah. So let's not make it about these surface level external problems. When we're not careful, the way this plays out, there is a very valid internal problem, the problem of sin, the problem of lust, the problem of men and women controlling their own thoughts and urges and desires. But because there's no easy solution for that, what we end up doing, if we're not careful, is we end up putting that problem we put that internal problem on an external thing. And that becomes pieces of female anatomy, and it expands to women in general. And now we have just tried to, taken a baseball bat where we needed a scalpel, and we've just bludgeoned an issue that should not have, it's a nuclear bomb situation where there's so much collateral damage that really, one, doesn't solve the problem in the first place, and two, it creates more problems that people who are in their mid-30s and 40s are now trying to unlearn. And they're leaving the church and they're leaving Jesus because of it.
So if you're listening to this in the week that it comes out, next week is Memorial Day, and it's the unofficial kickoff to the summer. And so this is something that I just want you to keep in mind as you go out through the summer. If you're a youth pastor that's listening to this, take a look at some of your rules this summer. Take a look at how you and your ministry and your leaders are approaching these things, because it's worth wrestling with and asking the 5 whys. Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? If you're a parent and you're throwing this shame onto your daughters, why? If you're a parent and you're letting your son wear super short chubbies that are super low cut, or going out in a Speedo, again, ask the why.
Or excusing their own responsibility in the situation.
Because If we are going to lead the next generation of Christians better, we have to start thinking about these hard issues and not being afraid of changing the way we teach the next generation from what we were taught. The people who taught us, they had good intentions. At least I'm going to give them credit and say that they had good intentions. They may not have, but I choose to look at it positively. They may have had good intentions, but we have enough data and experience to know that there were bad results from those good intentions. And we as parents and leaders are going to screw up, but we have the information that past generation that led us did not have. If we make the same mistakes, that is now on us.
Mm-hmm.
They get a pass they may not have known. We know now, so we have to do better now.
Totally agree. We now have the knowledge, we have the burden and the responsibility to do better. So I want to echo what Jonathan said. If you're a youth pastor, if you're a student ministry pastor, if you are working in ministry, hear me. I get you. It's hard. It is a difficult situation, especially if you are the youth pastor.
Hardest job in ministry.
And you have elders, you have deacons, you have your lead pastor, your executive pastor, and maybe they don't understand this. I get that it's difficult. And, if there's anything that I can do, if Jonathan can do, reach out to us, let us know, because we want to be able to walk with you, because we're passionate about the church. We're passionate about the next generation. And we're passionate, honestly, about you and your leadership to help you be able to lead people.
Absolutely. If you do want to reach out, you can find us on all the major social media platforms. I am at Jonathan_Carone on all three major platforms, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Eric, you're Eric W712 on all three platforms as well. So feel free to reach us out. You can get in touch with us at hello@Unlearning Youth Group. We've had some great emails recently, just helping you work through some stuff and some thoughts and issues and questions you've had. So feel free to email those in as well. Subscribe to the show, rate the show, share it with a friend. For now, we hope you have a great week, and we will talk to you next week.
Damn, I'm glad I ain't leaking high. My best days will be